Is our recording started, Joey? I haven't had a notification.
Yeah, it's just started now.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thanks everyone, and welcome to this webinar. We're going to talk about a little bit about the Lost Peatlands project, and then around the monitoring they were undertaking, and what that monitoring specifically aimed to So this is just a little bit of background about the Lost Peatlands project. So it's a HLF funded habitat restoration project. So the development phase of the project started in 2019, where we went about identifying which sites we were interested in restoring, how much peat there was, and what state it was in, and how we might want about going about restoration. And then this led into a delivery phase of the project in 2021 until 2025. So the project will end next year, where we're actually delivering the restoration we were interested in, identified for delivery. So the project spans a project area across the uplands of Neathport Talbot and Rhondda Cynon Taf. So this upland plateau between the Rhondda Valley, so the Rhondda Vach, the Rhondda Vawr, Glencorrwg in the Neath Valley, and encapsulates three different sites, or three large habitat restoration area sites anyway. So Cwmsaibren, Cregan, and we'll talk a little bit more about them in a few minutes. But this is the project team. This is the team behind delivery of the restoration. As you can see, myself and Joey, and Sarah's there in the front as well, and a few other members of the team. So this is the map of the Lost Peatlands project area. You can see the habitat restoration areas, or the HRAs there, outlined in blue, and you can see this might be relevant when you're thinking about perhaps coming to help us out with some of our monitoring works. I mean, some of these are going to be closer to where you're based than others. So you can see we got a HRA, so this blue site over in the east here, close to the Aberdare and the Vach valleys, and then we got Cwmsaibren in the centre here, which is located above Treorchy and Treherbert, and then we got Cregan, located over in the west of the project area, just above the Glencorrwg Valley and the Neath Valley, and the Avon Valley here. What else you wanted to say on the project, Joey? Have I missed anything?
No, I suppose I need to say that the community sites are more accessible than the upland peatland sites. So if there's anybody who maybe doesn't fancy tramping across Millenia Tussocks for maybe an hour or so for some of the activities we've got, there are sites which have paved pathways through them that we run events on as well.
Yeah, good point. So most of the monitoring we'll be talking about today is going to be the monitoring focused on the habitat restoration areas, but there are other small scale monitoring ongoing at these community well spaces as well. But it's much smaller scale monitoring and less frequent than the habitat restoration area monitoring that does take. So peatland afforestation. So most of the sites we're looking at are forest bog restoration. So they were afforested in the 1950s, 1960s as part of a drive to increase the strategic timber reserve within the UK. Something that was identified during the latter stages of the Second World War as being a kind of key risk to the country. And just because of the predominance of fairly cheap rough grazing land in the uplands of South Wales, this led to the kind of purchase of this land for afforestation, and this means that now large areas of the uplands in the valleys are covered in Sitka spruce plantations. And the Lost Peatlands project, and sits within this landscape as well as the Pennacymoedd Habitat Management Plan area. And we're now focused on the restoration of afforested peat bogs through to a more natural or semi-natural bog system where we can. What are the implications of afforestation? And this is Joey's slide, which I think probably Joey, you should talk to this one.
Yeah, no problem. So the main effects of the afforestation process, we split them into generally effects on the peat, and then effects that are shown through kind of surface characteristics of a peatland habitat. Originally, when these sites were ploughed, they would have been ploughed with a double moldboard plough. So that's one that creates two ridges either side of a furrow, which you can see in the picture. And the immediate loss of peat is something that would have happened fairly quickly. The trees are then planted on the ridges, and you get some compression of the upper layers of the peat. As the trees kind of draw moisture out and you get water loss through transpiration and through drainage, you can get something that we kind of refer to as internal erosion. That's kind of wastage of the internal layers of the peat that can lead to kind of collapse in the peat structure. So if you see that tree just leaning over towards the left of the picture slightly, that's because the underlying peat structure has changed. The traditional kind of peatland system that you will see has two-layer system. So you have a functional acrotelm where all the vegetation is held, then an underlying karstotelm, which is your decomposed plant material. In forest to bog systems, what we see a lot of the time is a loss of a functional acrotelm or a restriction of what would be kind of more typical acrotelm species towards the lowest point in the landscape, the wettest point in the landscape, which tends to be the furrows. You get a loss of the specialist and kind of native biodiversity that's associated with the uplands, not just kind of limited to specialist Maya species, but stuff that's more representative of kind of a dry or wet heath or acid grass and mosaic as well. And you get a really altered hydrological regime for the system as a whole through the flow pathway manipulation that they undertook to plant 2,500 Sitka spruce per hectare or more. And as a combination of all of these factors, the altered hydrological regime and the kind of loss of functional vegetation, it means that the system as a whole has an altered greenhouse gas flux dynamic. So you get different amounts of carbon and methane being emitted from different parts of the landscape, and the representation of the landscape as a whole is different to an intact system. Yeah, I think that covers that.
Yeah, cool. Cheers, Joe. Yeah, and I suppose the other thing we're saying is that this kind of broad scale change in the topography of the site and the micro topography of the site over big areas. So where you're changing this hydrological regime across really big areas, you're also changing the way water moves through the landscape. So that has downstream effects on stream flow and flood peaks and things like that as well. But so the reason we got this slide in really is to start thinking about the changes that happen to a peatland when you plant trees in it, and how you get those trees to grow for better or worse. So you can see the trees in this are not growing very well, and much of the trees in our landscape don't grow very well because they weren't very successful at making it dry enough to grow trees. But really, what we're aiming to do in the restoration process is remove a lot of these physical changes to the peat and to the landscape, to restore or move the system back towards what it would have been like prior to these alterations. So that generally takes the form of large-scale interventions to remove that kind of ridge and furrow microtopography. So I'm just going to show you a quick video of a digger on Pennacup. And this digger is using a method called ground smoothing, and it does very much what it says in the title. It's involved in removing that microtopography to try and remove those ridges and those furrows to create a less structured landscape. So it'll still have, variation in microtopography, but it won't be well connected. It won't have well connected hydrological flow pathways and drains to move that water off quickly. So it'll have a more chaotic kind of structure, leading to maybe some higher, drier bits, but then areas where water drains to and can't get away from. So you get pools and systems like that. So something a little more natural. And you can see the digger is picking up stumps in this part of the process to drive them into the furrow to help raise the table, the surface profile in those areas. And then you'll track back over this afterwards to help compress it down and remove that and help them remove that. This has the benefit of removing drainage pathways, so holding water on site a little bit better, and also compressing the upper layers down a little bit, so pushing that upper surface down closer to where the water table is as well. So one of the key things of the peatland really is it being wet. So you want that water table really close to the surface for as much of the year as possible. Generally, people say 10 centimeters is where you want to see that water table, and ideally you want to see that kind of area year round, more or less. So that's what we kind of aiming for in our restoration. And this is what it kind of looks like post-restoration. So these again some photos from Craigan, our HRA in the west. So this is one near the Avon Valley. And this was restored over 2023. So some works were done in spring 2023, and then some additional works in the autumn and winter 2023. So this is, you know, immediately post restoration, and you can see the photo to the left is showing that more level but still chaotic kind of surface topography. This is, you know, post ground smoothing, and you can see we've got really deep drains in the photo on the right there. These you can't really smooth these drains in where they've been deeply ploughed into the peatland surface, and then in these instances they've been blocked with a peat dam. And you can see you get that stepped kind of drop as you're looking down this drain. Did you want to say anything on the restoration, Joey?
I suppose that these are kind of representative of what the site looks like almost on day zero after restoration. So things are a bit more developed than they are in these pictures now. So we are starting to see kind of the comeback of the more typical Maya species. But if anyone hasn't been on a forest to bog site before, this is pretty much what you'll be dealing with.
Yeah, but yeah, again, to reiterate, when we're monitoring these sites, we've got sites at this stage, but also, you know, further down through the process of restoration. So a couple of years post restoration, up to 3 or 4 years post restoration on some of the Penicamoid sites. So you can see that development through time across a lot of our sites, as well as Joey indicated. So when we start thinking about this restoration framework in how we would deliver restoration on some of our sites, we've got kind of this decision tree type framework about how we would go about recommending restoration interventions. And this is our kind of decision or restoration framework that Joey really put together. And Joe, do you want to talk through this and the Castell Nos example?
Yeah, of course. So broadly, when we come to design our kind of restoration interventions, this would be the pathway that we would follow. The initial separation of what methodology you might use to restore a given habitat is kind of purely based on the peat depth in the first instance. For us, that is because if we have a stump height of, say, 80 centimeters, and we need to ideally flip and crush that stump into the peat, but we've only got 60 centimeters worth of peat, that depth of peat then becomes a limiting factor for us to have kind of effective intervention. When you get into kind of a more typical raised bog, or maybe a site that doesn't have as much of a history of an afforestation on it, you might then be considering peat depth for things like bunding or peat damming, where you need a specific quality of peat, which is often from kind of a deeper level within the overall peat profile. So peat depth is something that we always need to kind of keep in mind for any kind of peatland restoration. For then kind of the obvious split for us is whether there's stumps or no stumps on site. So for this example, for Castell Nos, the site burned about 10 or so years, I think, before we came in with our involvement, and so there weren't any stumps left over, and so it was a slightly atypical kind of forest to bog restoration for us. So in a system where we don't have enough peat to effectively work with, it becomes sort of more of a guided native species regeneration, where we might reintroduce some species or remove some invasive species through vegetation management. And where we have deep peat to work with, rather than flipping the stumps and crushing them in, it becomes more about blocking the plough lines. Something that is kind of unique to Castell Nos on the sites that we work with, but maybe not unique within the landscape, is the presence of large erosion channels. These are, well, taller than I am, not that is saying much, probably about 6.5 feet tall and maybe 10 meters wide, if you'll forgive me for mixing units. And so for those, we have large timber dams which are being installed this summer. If we skip forward to the next slide, Mike, I think those are, yeah. So these are the restoration intervention maps for Castell Nos. So we have a total of about 22.5 hectares that was worked, with about 16 hectares of that being cross-tracking and peat damming, and then a further 6 hectares of only cross-tracking. So cross-tracking is just driving the digger back and forth over one track and then 90 degrees. That just try and compress some of the ridge and furrow microtopography that was left from the ploughing. And peat dams were put in about 1 every 10 meters. This work was completed in early 2022, so it's had a bit of a time to develop now, but there is going to be some further works later on this year. Something that was unique for Castell Noss at this stage was that we had protected species on site. So we had water vole on site in one of the drains. And so all works were carried out under a species license. And we had to leave the borrow pits for the peat dams open. So if you ever see an aerial photo of this site, you'll see lots of open water bodies on the site in a fairly regular pattern. It's not something that's normal, but it's something that's opened up the habitat nicely. And we've had kind of a nice bouncing back of species.
Yeah, cheers.
Yeah, sorry, man.
No, I was just going to say that there's, you know, it's just those same principles again, isn't it? That the interventions that we're undertaking on the sites are all aimed at restoring the hydrological functioning, basically, of the peat. We're trying to raise the water table and and remove the drainage that was installed to aid tree growth generally in these landscapes. And that, you know, that crossovers to more natural peatlands as well, where usually drainage is installed to increase agricultural productivity or for some other reason. So just skipping along to the next slide, this is our most recent restoration, which was completed over 2 phases last year. So we had, this is the Cregan HRA, showing an aerial. I think the aerial was probably captured in the middle of last summer at some point. So the kind of darker areas. So there's a yellow outline. You can see that that's the area that was restored, and it's around about 45 hectares or 48 hectares, I think, in size. And then within that, you can see some darker shade areas in the south. And they were areas that were delivered in the kind of spring of 2023, prior to the early stage of the bird nesting season. And then the remainder of the site was delivered in the last part of the winter, or autumn or winter of 2023. And this was a more traditional forest to bog restoration. So the trees were felled shortly before restoration work. So we had those stumps and the ribbed and furrow microtopography. So when we went through our kind of restoration framework, it was much more ground smoothing at this site and much less kind of cross-tracking interventions. But I don't have the exact breakdown for this site, but generally a lot more ground smoothing undertaken at this site. And those early photos of restoration we showed higher up were actually from this site collected last year. So when we start thinking about how these restoration interventions we're implementing and what things we might want to, oh, I forgot, sorry, Cwm site. Did you want to talk about the restoration from Cwm, Joe?
Yeah, so Cwm is well, just on the TSF plateaus of Treorchy. It's our smallest site, and there's only about 2.5 hectares that was worked during the course of the contract, where the primary concern for us was a small area of peat towards the southeast of the site. Our HRA does actually extend over more of the site, but the rest of it is being kept intact as kind of an unrestored reference for the moment, because there were concerns about the hydrology of neighbouring areas, and whether us restoring the wider plateau would have any impact on the hydrology of those neighbouring areas. So we have 2 site conditions within this one site. The area that has been restored was to kind of more of a Castell Noss spec with some peat dams that went in a major channel through the middle, and plough lines that were blocked as well. There were small areas of stump flipping, but the trees didn't take particularly well on this area. And these works are about a year old now. Things are coming back fairly quickly, but there is a sphagnum inoculation program which is going to be happening towards the last half of this year, where we're going to be reintroducing some native Welsh sphagnum to the site.
Yeah, and yeah, as I was just saying before, I forgot about Cwm. When we start thinking about the interventions we've undertaken at these sites and what things we can monitor to kind of evaluate the success of our restoration interventions, we need to be kind of mindful of the timeline of the project. In that, you know, the project we're working on has funding constraints that end in 2025, so we need to be monitoring things primarily that we can hopefully measure, you know, give us a proxy measurement of change in that kind of time frame for a fairly low or minimal kind of time requirement, because it's only me and Joey doing stuff. Obviously, potentially with a lot of volunteers now, maybe as well, but maybe not. So the things we're most interested in monitoring, as we talked about, I mean, one of the key things is this, you know, raising the water table. So we're really interested in water table depth measurements, but also in how those changes cascade through to vegetation, and then through to species groups. So when we can't monitor all species groups, but there's a few things that we're kind of interested in and chosen that we might monitor, so specifically bats and birds. And then also, as Joey mentioned earlier on, there's a boardwalk population on one of our sites. So we specifically have to monitor that as part of the license requirements. So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk a little bit about each of these kind of specific monitoring regimes we have to monitor the change at our sites, how we go about doing it, what kind of our initial results are showing, and how you can potentially get involved and what kind of opportunities there are to get involved and how that might fit in with what people might want to do. Is there any questions on that kind of really fast whistle stop through peatland restoration? I don't see anyone's hands up, so if anyone's got hands up, Joe, can you?
Yeah, no problem. There's no one at the minute, but there is the chat as well. If anyone wants to ask anything as we go along, I'll try and answer things as they come up.
Brilliant. Silence. Cool. Okay, so yeah, when we the kind of key thing, the key metric for us really, and the thing that changes really quickly when you start blocking up drainage ditches and smoothing out the topography is water table, basically. It's almost a near instant response in the water table depth, in that as soon as you stop water flowing off, but you've still got inputs coming in, so you've still got rain coming in or topographic flow coming in, then the water table in your peatland will rise fairly quickly. So we measure this using dip wells. So these are just plastic tubes inserted into the soil profile. There's kind of a schematic diagram on the right of the slide there, and these are perforated, so they equalize with the water table depth within the soil profile, and you can measure the water table depth within those either manually, so just having a look and putting a tape measure in to measure how far down it is. But we actually use something called automatic water table logging units, which are simply pressure transducers. So they measure the pressure, and that gives you a measure of how deep the water table is beneath the soil surface, every 15 minutes throughout the day and for over a long period of time. And you can just see we've got 4 or 5 dip wells spread across each of our sites, and there's just a map on the left-hand side there showing where the dip wells are located at our Castlas North habitat restoration areas. We've got 2 in the north, and then 3 dip wells in the south treated area. So the effectively going out to monitor these dip wells involves going out and downloading the data from each logger unit at each dip well periodically. So probably we go out maybe once a year to do this, because they'll keep logging for up to 3 or 4 years data. And this is some of the initial restoration data from our Castlas North site. You can see you've got the dip wells in columns there, so LP6, 7, 8, 9 are the actual dip wells. We've got the average water table depth pre-restoration and post-restoration, and this is in meters below ground level. But counterintuitively, you can see that actually we've post-restoration got a higher water table. So the water table, or higher numbers, so the water table is actually further away from the surface in these measurements for each of our dip wells. And that's just simply a function of the fact that the time periods we're monitoring over, so our pre-restoration kind of time frame doesn't include one of the drawdown periods, so the spring where the water table was lower, so it's artificially slightly higher than you could, and we got a longer post-restoration timeline or sample. So that when we collapse this data down to means, it's not really that representative of the effect we've had. So when we're looking at this data, we need to think about different ways to show it. And we move towards this kind of representation. So this is just a cumulative frequency graph. It basically tells you the amount of values that are within a certain number, basically. So 100% of the values are, for the blue line on the left graph, are within 0.2 meters below ground level. What we're looking for here in our kind of successive restoration intervention is that the lines are further apart. So what we're showing here is a control dip well, so a dip well that hasn't been restored. So the orange dip well, and how far away the lines are between each so dotted line, how different the dotted line is from the solid line. And you can see that our blue lines in the left-hand graph. So the dotted blue line is closer to the solid blue line than the orange. And what that means is that although because of changes in inputs, so like precipitation and evapotranspiration, so the inputs and the outputs of the system, they change through time. So although that's changed through time, what we've actually done by our restoration interventions is buffered that. We've closed the gap between those two lines, meaning that our system loses less water. And it's a fairly complicated way of presenting the data, but it accounts for that difference in rainfall and evapotranspiration you see in between your differences in water table. I've probably butchered the explanation of that. So Joe, did you want to come in and try and do a better job?
No, I thought you did a great job. Yeah, it's hard to separate out sometimes the year-on-year effects. I think is probably the key message, just from kind of natural seasonal variations and year-on-year variations in temperature and the effect that's going to have on the water table. So while we originally looked at the data and maybe had a small heart attack and thought that we'd lowered the water table by our restoration, having actually made it more resilient to kind of climatic changes is a positive outcome for us.
Yeah, exactly. I suppose one of the key things that influenced this data is that it observed over the real significant drawdown in the drought in 2023. That led to that probably lower overall water table depth in our post-restoration data at Castell Nos, just because it was such an unusual event that wasn't represented in our pre-restoration data. But it's something we're probably more likely to see in future. So potentially we're making our peatlands more resilient to those kind of changes in future. So yeah, there are opportunities to get involved with this. If you're particularly interested in hydrological monitoring, then you can come out in the field with myself or Joey and download some of this data. It's not the most exciting of afternoons out, but it does get you out and about wandering up across the peatlands. And we've got, as I say, 5 dip wells at each site. So we do this probably once or twice a year. Generally, I only go out on a sunny day. I believe Joey also goes out when it's raining. Joe, do you?
I don't think I've been out on a sunny day yet. So, yeah.
Yeah, also, if you want to get involved in any of the data analysis and manipulation, if you don't fancy coming out in the rain in the field to download some of these dip wells, then these automatic water level loggers logging data every 15 minutes produce vast quantities of water table depth measurements, so tens of thousands for each dip well. So if you're particularly interested in data analysis and manipulation of data and graphs, then this data is really fun to play with. And yeah, there's an opportunity to get involved with that. And yeah, now moving on to the
I just see we've got a hand up, Mike, sorry.
Oh yeah, okay.
Melissa.
Hi there. Just with regards to the dip well information, pre and post work, are you starting to see a statistically significant difference between the levels? And if not, when do you think that might start to occur? Is it kind of way a ways yet, or are you starting to kind of see hints of it now and again?
So yes, we do. The thing we struggle is that because it's a time series of data, the time series before our restoration interventions isn't a full annual cycle, and it's a smaller sample than our post-restoration intervention. Those numbers are not directly comparable.
Yeah.
So the way we're probably going to analyze it and to look at whether we got a particularly different difference or whatever is probably going to use a distance measurement from a kind of reference dip well bit, essentially, and seeing if we move in our
control dip well. Was that right?
Yes, we've got a couple of control dip wells. We've got a control dip well in a dry habitat, an untreated habitat, and we've got a couple of control dip wells in what we would consider reasonable quality bog, and then we can get a measure of how far those water table measurements are from each of those two states and see how far we move towards it post-restoration, pre-restoration. And if we look at the data like that, then we do see a difference, statistically significant difference post-restoration. Meaning
there we go. That's good.
Yeah, which is a relief. Yes.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, lovely. Thank you.
No worries. Cool. Joe, do you want to do a brief overview of the vegetation monitoring?
Yeah, sounds good to me. I'm the moss nerd of this duo, so yeah, if there is a lot of vegetation monitoring to do, normally you'll be on site with me. That might put some people off, but I think that moss is another word so fascinating. So it's always fun to have your nose to the ground with a hand lens and see what you can find. All of our sampling points for our HRAs are done on a 100-meter grid across the entire site. That normally works out at sort of between 70 and 100 individual 2x2 quadrats at each point. At each quadrat, all the vegetation is recorded. All the vascular plant and bryophyte species are identified to species level, along with a percentage cover for our 2x2s, and this gets translated into a Davor scale for us as well. We have some wider 10x10 quadrats which will be installed this year for continuation post-project, and on those that's just a species list with an associated Davor scale, because it's easier just to manage it that way for a 10x10 quadrat rather than a 2x2 quadrat. The species mix that we get on site is quite atypical of what you would expect for both an upland kind of conifer plantation in some places and kind of a blanket bog type habitat in the other. So it can be sometimes challenging to maybe rewire your brain to consider both habitats that get represented at different kind of percentage levels across the site. But I think one thing that's kind of important is that firstly, we're not just going to, abandon you on site and say, go and do this. We're more than happy to go out with people and train you up in sphagnum identification or whatever else you find interesting. But also there's a timeline for us to get this work done year on year. But if there are specific volunteering days where we go out, we don't have a set number of things that we want to get completed on that day. It's more important that whoever is out with us firstly has a nice time, but also kind of get something useful out of the day. So we're more than happy to kind of spend as much time as needed on whatever we need to.
Just a little example of some of the data we're getting from some of the vegetation data that Joey's collected. So this is just some of the initial results from the post-restoration, pre-restoration comparison data from Castell Nos. So this was, as probably saw, a kind of slightly atypical restoration when we went through our kind of restoration interventions and our framework. So this was a well-vegetated site pre-restoration with a kind of unique mix of forestry and open habitat and modified bog type species, which probably explains why if we just collapse our data down to diversity, we see this significant drop in diversity post-restoration. So it's really important to take the context into consideration when you start your data analysis of this kind of stuff. But when we start thinking about positive indicators, so when we thought about the things we want to see back at our site, so species that are indicative of a wet, good quality bog, so some of the good quality sphagnum species. If you look in the graph on the right, we can see the occurrence of these species increasing through time. So we're getting more of the darker colours appearing and higher counts of those as well in number of quadrats. So that's kind of indicative of an increase in positive indicators that we're moving away from the restoration. So although our habitat species diversity is potentially dropped, we're seeing more species that are indicative of a good quality bog habitat returning, which in some of these upland environments is potentially less diverse anyway. Did you want to say anything on that, Joe?
Just a note on the kind of diversity metric, I suppose, is that a good way I find to think about it, if it's not a system that you're kind of familiar with, is that the species that were introduced to the majority of our sites, so Sitka spruce, the original seed stock for the Sitka spruce from the valleys came from the Queen Charlotte Islands off the west coast of Canada, so kind of a northern Pacific species, and the introduction of these non-native species has kind of driven an associated change in the ground flora. So it is really important to consider the context, because while you might look at that and think, well, there's been a loss in species diversity, we have sort of effectively just wiped out the majority of the species that wouldn't have been there anyway to get it back to something that more closely approximates a kind of a natural system.
So again, there's good opportunity to get involved in this surveying, and as Joey said, Joey's the man to contact about field data. Did you want to say about anything about the field data collection season, Joe, and what more entails for this, or are you?
Yeah, so the data there will probably be out, I would say, towards the end of June, and then through July. We tend to have quite a kind of a late growing season, start of the growing season, where we are, just because it is quite high altitude, quite cold. So just giving things kind of an extra couple of weeks to get going is normally the best way to go. It tends to be an entire day on site, so it is something best to prepare for, I suppose, and plan to be there for the whole day. But as I said before, we can run it as a kind of pure volunteering thing, where we just give you a set number of quadrats and you can go out and do them, or we can run it more as a training thing, where it's us going through quadrats with you, and kind of developing skills at the same time.
Yeah, and I mean, there's also, as with some of the other things we're doing, opportunities to get involved in the data analysis and manipulation. So looking at this vegetation data and seeing how diversity or axiophyte appearance is changing. Or if you're not interested in that side of things, simply transferring data from Joey's notebook into a spreadsheet for him. I'm sure he would welcome anyone who's keen to do that. It's not only vegetation and water table depth monitoring, although these are really, some of the key elements that we're looking at for things we're reporting on for our HLF monitoring. But we're also doing species-specific monitoring. So some of this is for things that we're particularly interested in or think that might respond relatively quickly to the changes we're doing, and some of the things, like we talked about with Waterfall, is really specific to some of our sites and the licensing requirements around the works that we've undertaken. So things we're specifically doing, things like breeding bird surveys, fact activity surveys, and waterfall surveys. So we'll go through each of these in turn now. And breeding bird surveys essentially consist of walked transact surveys, and these tend to be mostly on forest tracks or good footpaths, as our sites are, former forestry sites, so they either have a forestry track around the boundary or through the middle of them in some cases, and also their footpaths and generally drier walking routes that we can take. And they tend to be around about a 2 or 3 kilometre walk loop. So we walk the same transects on each occasion. Usually alternate which direction, and consists of 3 early morning visits to each of the HRA sites, so the 3 sites we've got spread across the uplands across the breeding season, so generally April to June in our kind of landscape, and one evening visit later on in the year, so June-ish, July, to try and pick up potential nightjar in the landscape as well. So these do require a reasonable level of fitness, but you're not walking across heavily tussocky Molinia generally, so it's not lethal, but it can be a challenging distance to walk on some occasions. But alongside the actual walk transect routes, where we walk and record all species of bird we encounter through sight or song. So, and if you're not familiar with identifying birds from either of those, then we can, as Joey said, with the vegetation side of things, we can give you as much support as you want, or as little as you want as well. So if you want to take on a site and go and do the walked breeding bird transect surveys yourself, then happily give you the details of the transect route and set you up to go off and do that. And that's something we've done previously with some of our sites. So Castell Nos was previously done on that basis. But also we're also trying the deployment of passive acoustic monitoring detectors, so little recorders and there's also the opportunity to deploy some of those, retrieve those in, and they just record basically sound for snippets in time that you've set a recording schedule for, and record all species vocalization, so birds as well as any insect species as well. So if you're particularly interested in acoustic monitoring, then you can get involved in that as well. Again, just an example of some of the data that we're getting back from some of these surveys. You can see just a summary of a lot of the species we get across our site. So this is kind of typical of our sites. This is more heavily biased towards the pre-restoration phase, because our post-restoration data is only slowly coming in. But you can see you got a flavour of many woodland bird species. So things like chaffinch and wren and robin and coal-tit and siskin are quite frequent. But interestingly, we're still picking up some of those open habitat species as well. So things like meadow pipit, they're in there, and skylark, and cuckoo. So it's a real mix of species, and quite a unique mix of open and woodland species in these upland environments. Expect that to change as our habitats change from this closed canopy or more closed canopy woodland into more open habitat, and perhaps again species diversity might change, but what's likely to happen is we're likely to see an increase in some of those rarer open habitat specialists, or that's what we'd like to see anyway. But as I said as well, we're also using these little passive acoustic monitoring detectors, and these have been deployed on our sites a couple of times now. So we've got around about 50 hours of acoustic sampling spread across 100 days. It does generate quite a lot of data, and we do need to come up with some ways of analysing this data in an effective way. So we've been exploring these things called bioacoustic indices. So if you're particularly interested in any of this, then there's opportunity to explore some of this data using bioacoustic indices. And really interestingly, we see suggestion that our bioacoustic index is higher post-restoration than pre-restoration. Bioacoustic index is just a simple kind of metric of how variable the sound is in a file. And it's in theory has some relationship to the variation in sound or biological sound that's been created in the environment. But still, a lot more work to do in this area to figure out what actually is going on. So if you're particularly interested in any of this, then yeah, feel free to get in touch and potentially get involved with that. So field data collection for the breeding bird survey and the passive acoustic monitors is this kind of April to June breeding bird survey window. So if you're particularly interested in that, then either reach out to myself, Joey, or Sarah, and we can talk you through the requirements and either support you with coming to site with you to help you undertake the survey work, or just simply provide you with information and organise access for you to get onto a site and undertake any survey work. And similar to the other kind of monitoring we discussed earlier on, there's also opportunity to get involved in either data manipulation or data transfer or analysis of data, if any of those things are of particular. Do you want to talk a little bit about back surveys, Joe?
Yeah. So similar to breeding bird surveys, we've got walks, transects for our bats on site. This is a kind of walkthrough around each of the sites with points along the transects that we stop at and do a count of the number of passes that we see during a set time. So for all of our upland sites, all of our big peatland HRAs, there's 3 visits a year, which tend to be led by either Mike or myself. We have some spare bat detectors at the council. If anyone doesn't have a bat detector and you'd like to join on that day, we can provide some equipment with you, or if you have your own, you're more than welcome to bring your own as well. So those transects are repeated 3 times for each site per year. And then alongside those, we have more passive acoustic monitoring that goes out with some automatic detectors that we deploy on site. I think similar to the bird surveys, these can generate quite a lot of data, but we've got some of our initial results that have come in already. I think on the next slide, if you want to talk about that, Mike.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, this is just another very similar slide to the PAM slide we had earlier on, but just with some specifics around the bat detectors and the ultrasound recorded. So we've deployed around 25 detectors across 150 nights, and generated a lot of data for bats using this, and generally been analysing this data using the BTO acoustic pipeline, which is an automated ID process for ultrasound, and it generates lots of classifications for each of these files, telling you what bat species and the probability it is of that bat species, but also invertebrate species and the small mammal species. So if you're particularly interested in bats ID, then there's some work to be done there on validating some of those identifications. So maybe take a subset and look at how accurate the ID is using the BTO acoustic pipeline. But also, just getting out and deploying these detectors and retrieving them as well. So that's something that we would be very keen to have help with if anyone was particularly interested and wanted to gain experience in that as well. And when we look at some of the data we get from some of our sites, so this is looking at the diversity of bat species recorded at each of these sampling locations. So using something called the Simpson's Diversity Index, which takes the number of species, but also the number of registrations of each individual species as well, to produce a single kind of number of diversity. We see again there is a difference between our restored and our unrestored sites, with a slightly higher average diversity in our restored sites. It'd be really nice to think that's as a result of our restoration interventions, and maybe changes in invertebrates that are cascading from some of that hydrological restoration. But it's a little bit too early to conclude that at this point in time. But that's the kind of data you potentially could get to explore and play with if this was something that was of interest. So there's opportunities to get involved again in the field survey, so the Transect survey. I mean, these surveys are at night, so and so they generally take place on forestry tracks, because we don't want to be tramping across the peatlands and really tussocky grassland at night. So it's fairly easy walking route, slightly shorter than the breeding bird survey, so usually around a kilometre or 2 kilometres in length. And with our point counts, usually takes around about an hour and a half to 2 hours to complete. And obviously they take place around dusk. So we usually start around about 10-15 minutes after dusk and run for around about an hour and a half to 2 hours afterwards. And due to the timings of these surveys in the year, most of our bat activity at our sites is later in the year. So we tend to get most of our activity June onwards. It means we're surveying on site. On site around about 9ish, and then leaving site maybe 11, half 11. So if that's something that particularly appeals to you, and they on still warm nights in the summer, they are really lovely places to be. Doesn't always happen, but it can be a really nice way to experience the peatlands, assuming it's not too midgy at that point in time. But also there's the opportunities to go around deploying some of those passive acoustic detectors again and retrieving those, and sonogram analysis if you're interested in bat ID and really want to drill into IDing bats from the vocalizations. So you can just see some examples of sonograms on the right there. So this is just a pictorial representation of a sound. So this is, red is where the highest energy in the sound is. Then we can support you with that. So we can give you access to the BTO acoustic pipeline data and some sonogram viewing software and some of these sonograms, and you can explore that. Then we can help you learn how to ID some of the common species that we encounter in our region. We do get a good variety of species. We probably get about 9 or 10 different species occurring across our sites. So Porcel horseshoes occurring, and pipistrelles, including enthusiast pipistrelle in the migration period, and occasional very rare records of barbastelle as well. But I think all the big bats, noctule, liselers, and serotine. So good variety of species. And also there's again opportunities to get involved with the analysis of the data. So if you're particularly interested in, around restoration, is bat diversity increasing as we move through time, a restoration trajectory across our sites, then yeah, we'd be keen to have you involved. And so I hand over to you to talk a little bit about water vole, Joe.
Yeah, sounds good. I wish that was one of our pictures. That's a lovely photo of a waterfall. Our waterfall surveys for Lost Peatlands are concentrated on one site, so it's on Castell Nos. We identified positive signs for waterfall the year before our restoration started on that site, so it would have been in 2021, I think. And as a result of the licensing process that we had to do to complete the works on site, we have yearly surveys that we have to complete to assess the presence or absence of watervole from different areas of the site, and just kind of how they are doing and how they're responding to the habitat works that we've done as part of the project. So there's 2 complete site surveys of the whole site, which normally happens over multiple days, and those are held between April and September, with the first watervole survey day coming up on the 23rd of April, so fairly soon. But there will be more if you can't make it on that day, and it is something that you're interested in. Generally, what these surveys involve is we will choose a section of the site to work on for that day, and we'll walk all the drains in that given section, check for positive signs, which we'll cover in a slightly later slide, I think, and some of the borrow pits that have left open following the works, and some of the more terrestrial areas as well. Something that's slightly unusual for our watervole population in the uplands compared to what you might see of a more kind of typical watervole population in the lowlands is that they do live more fossorially. They do spread out more into terrestrial locations than their lowland cousins. If you could skip on to the next slide, Mike, I think that's the map. Yeah, so this is our kind of original population area within our works area for watervole on Castell Nos. There was one fairly spatially limited population on the eastern side of our northern working area. It's a drain that runs kind of adjacent to the forestry road. It's fairly well vegetated, and I think fairly typically for where we find the watervole in the uplands, it tends to be quite juncus dominated with a fairly high water table. We've kind of consistently found good field signs there, things like latrines or cut stems. And this year we found a couple of burrows, but we haven't seen anything coming in and out of them yet, so we don't know how active they're going to be. Post-restoration, if there's a post-restoration map there, we then had an expansion of that kind of eastern stronghold on the north side of the site out into the site more widely, utilising the borrow pits, network of borrow pits that we had left on site. And that was kind of identified through the same field signs, cut stems and latrines droppings across the site more widely. Under the black hatched area just south of the initial population, there is a pond in Castell Nos. It's been established for about 80 years now in its current location, and the watervole seemed to set up a fairly strong population around there last year. So that is something that we've added onto our surveys on top of the network of drainage surveys that we do, is a circular transect around the pond, checking for any field signs.
Cool. Yeah, so again, very similar opportunities to we discussed earlier on. Opportunity to get involved with field surveys. So again, or poo, essentially. You can just see some watervole poo next to my finger there in front of a burrow. But also, if you don't want to come out into the field and look for poo, and you know, surprising as that might seem, there's also the opportunity to do some sonogram analysis for watervole as well. So put the BTO pipeline also picks up waterfall vocalizations, so they will produce ultrasound vocalizations, and we occasionally pick these up on back detectors. So some validation of that would be really interesting to see if we are actually picking these up, if the acoustic pipeline's right. And again, help with data analysis and mapping of records. If you, but if you are particularly keen to come out and look for poo in the field, these surveys tend to take us 3 or 4 days at least, really, to cover the site in its entirety, and occasionally slightly more depending on the opportunities with weather. So there should be plenty of opportunity to come out and do waterfall surveys at this site, and it is a great site to learn how to survey for upland waterfall, in that we do see signs on most visits, and they are present year round. which is not the same for every site in the landscape. So if that's something you're particularly interested in, then yeah, it's a great opportunity to get involved in something like that. And that really brings us to the end of our presentation. I'm very aware we pretty much talked at you for an hour, a lot of information, but we stop there. If there's any questions.
I'll stop the recording now as well for question time.